My name's David. I work for Epilepsy Action. I'm the senior officer on our Helpline service, running a team that speaks to people affected by epilepsy every day. Epilepsy is usually what they describe as having recurrent seizures. Often people may be diagnosed with epilepsy if they have more than one seizure, and the seizures themselves are unusual electrical activity in the brain, a sudden burst of that activity, which then leads to the symptoms that people think about. In terms of how it comes about, it's quite tricky to answer really, because there's a lot that we still don't know. It can start at any age, but we do know that it's more common for it to start in childhood or at an older age. And what causes it to develop can be tricky, as there can be a clear cause, such as brain damage, brain tumours or genetic factors. But in many cases, the exact cause is just not known. Around 1 in 107 people in the UK have epilepsy, and that's around 630,000 people. But it is more common in people with a learning disability as well. In any given school setting, there's probably around 300 children. So chances are around 2 to 3 children are going to have epilepsy in any given school.
I just wanted to learn about how it affects people's daily lives and what kind of activities it affects during life, and does it affect people's behaviours and actions?
Epilepsy is a very varied condition, so it affects people in many different ways. Some people, particularly those whose seizures are fully controlled, may find that it has little effect on their daily life. But people with epilepsy often tell us about the effect their epilepsy has on things like their independence, safety, and employment, for example. The impact of seizures themselves, recovering from seizures, side effects of epilepsy treatment. It can all cause their own issues. Sometimes it can be issues that alter mood, change people's mood, that affects their memory, for example. In most cases, people who have recently had a seizure or still have seizures aren't allowed to drive, and that's a big thing that we hear quite a lot about, as this can be a massive change for people newly diagnosed or who have had a seizure breakthrough after them being controlled for a while.
Do they have to be on medication as well for this, or is it just happens during, because you said it's doing with learning difficulty as well and like that? What are the signs and symptoms with it as well? Does it give us any side effects, or do they have to have medication for it?
Taking medication is absolutely the person's choice, and that should be done with the best information, usually from a specialist, to somebody who is then diagnosed with epilepsy. In most cases, epilepsy medicine is the most common form of treatment and is the first option in the majority of cases. There's over 20 different types of epilepsy medicines used in the UK. They aren't a cure for epilepsy, but they work by trying to stop seizures from happening, so they control those symptoms of epilepsy. Half of people with epilepsy find that the first medicine is effective in controlling their seizures, and most do get seizure control when they get on the right dose of the right medicines. For some, that can take some trial and error. Many people have told us about going through many different medicines, eventually getting to the right combination. For some, unfortunately, they have what you might see described as drug-resistant epilepsy. So it may be that other treatment options are appropriate, but often these other treatment options come alongside still taking epilepsy medicine. They include things like brain surgery, vagus nerve stimulation, or VNS for short, which is a device that is fitted that helps to hopefully control seizures, and the ketogenic diet is one that is sometimes used as well. We encourage anyone who wants to know more about those specific treatments to chat to us on our helpline or visit our website. Lots of information on those.
Has anyone found any cures of epilepsy, and what are the potential risk factors of epilepsy?
This is a question that, we would absolutely love to be able to answer with that really positive yes, but unfortunately it is much more complicated than that. There isn't a known and established cure for epilepsy. There's a lot of research happening, and I'd certainly say watch this space. There's a lot we still don't know about epilepsy, and there's some exciting things out there, but research at the moment is limited. What the important thing for people with epilepsy is getting control of those seizures, controlling the symptoms, and then somebody who still has epilepsy but has full control of seizures often has very little else to think about than anyone else. And what they may find eventually, if they've had their seizures controlled with medicine, is that many people will be able to stop taking epilepsy medicine, often around after about 2 years. It's appropriate to have those conversations with the specialist to ask completely withdrawing medicine. Some people will need to take medicine for the rest of their lives, but it could be the case that some people can stop, and they often call that epilepsy is resolved, but not necessarily cured. This can also be the case for children as well. So epilepsy that starts in childhood, may have heard the terms grown out of the epilepsy, and that can certainly be the case. They can be quite age dependent and may resolve by puberty or by adulthood.
Is there like side effects for if someone like does like drink alcohol, or if they're smoking, or they smoke shisha, vapes? Is there anything on that as well? Side effects does it make, or is that just readings that I've read online?
In most cases, what's recommended for people with epilepsy is to follow the standard sort of NHS health advice. So around diet, around drinking, smoking, caffeine, all these things. Generally, it's just following the NHS advice for any person and just having that balance, having things in moderation, really. Often, people with epilepsy, they are able to drink. There's some medicines that it might be more of a problem to have alcohol on. Many people do find that things like drinking alcohol can be a trigger for their seizures, particularly if it might lead to sort of missing meals, missing doses of medicine, all those sorts of things as well. But generally speaking, what's recommended is just following the standard health advice. It's always going to be recommended that people try to stop smoking, but there isn't much more specific to people with epilepsy on that, other than just keeping good general health.
But would still people get side effects with that if they like did it constantly, and then would they get a reaction from epilepsy, or is that just on the person's needs?
It's from person to person, really. As I say, it's such a varied condition that many people will find that certain things are a trigger for them and they're not for somebody else. In terms of triggers, many people do find that those certain things trigger their seizures. It can be really helpful for them to try and avoid those triggers. What we understand and what people tell us are the main triggers are missing a dose of epilepsy medicine. So many people choose to use things like pillboxes, alarms, or apps on their smartphones. But people often report other triggers as well that include stress, tiredness, lack of sleep. Epilepsy can create a difficult cycle where it can cause those things as well. It can cause stress, it can cause tiredness, lack of sleep. We unfortunately know that people with epilepsy are more likely to experience problems with their well-being, but those things in turn can be a trigger as well. So it's quite a vicious cycle and a difficult one to break out of. So it's important that this is managed, and when we talk to people, we encourage them, to speak to their GP or their specialist if they're having problems managing their well-being, because what we want to see those issues not just put down to epilepsy, but treated separately as well. For many people, keeping a seizure diary can help them keep track of their seizures, which can help them identify what might be triggering their seizures as well. Some people manage by having sort of systems in place if a seizure happens, if they're struggling to control any triggers or they're not sure what those triggers are. They manage by having systems in place. So this can include carrying an ID card. It could be having a care plan that people close to them are aware of so they know exactly what to do, and having any necessary adjustments in place, whether that's at school, work, or when accessing activities and services.
What are the signs leading up to the diagnosis? Are there any emotional signs that are indicative about epilepsy?
Almost sound like a broken record, but signs and symptoms can be very varied, and even then they can be very similar to other conditions as well. So it's important that the right diagnosis is got to as quickly as possible. So while there's some tests that can aid doctors in diagnosing epilepsy, it is often mainly diagnosed based on the person's symptoms and taking their detailed medical history into account. Signs and symptoms of seizures can vary greatly. Most people think about tonic-clonic seizures and how they involve losing consciousness, muscle stiffening and the body shakes. But people with epilepsy tell us that more awareness needs to be raised for other seizure types. And we agree. For example, absence seizures involve a sudden loss of awareness, usually lasting a few seconds, but some people may find that these happen in clusters of multiple absence seizures. Myoclonic seizures involve sudden jerks, often particular parts of the body, but sometimes the entire body is affected. Again, for some, these can happen in clusters. Some people may have seizures where their awareness is affected, but many also experience seizures where they may be fully aware of what's happening but have no control. And this can involve movement, such as tugging at clothing or lip smacking, or feelings and sensations, such as a rising feeling in the tummy, feeling frightened, or smell of burnt toast even. These are just some examples of the many different possible symptoms of seizures. So again, keeping a diary. If someone thinks they may have had a seizure for the first time, speak to their GP. What they will do then is, if they think it could possibly be epilepsy, is they'll refer to an epilepsy specialist. And having things like diaries, even videos, can be helpful for doctors in diagnosing epilepsy.
Can you talk about the treatments that are available and give us an insight into how accessible are they, the treatments?
Because different people have different disabilities also. You could have a wheelchair person, it could be a visually impaired person, or it could be just someone that's got a hidden disability with learning difficulties.
As I say, epilepsy medicine is the most common. As you say, particularly for people who may have other health conditions, that may be a factor in deciding what the most appropriate medicines to try are, or which one to start with. They'll take all those into account, so the person's circumstances, what other medicines they may be taking, what other conditions they may have. That's usually the first line treatment, is epilepsy medicine. I mentioned some of the other treatments before, but it is possible as well if they identify a treatment such as brain surgery, for example, could actually be the best form of treatment for someone if that's identified as part of the diagnosis. It's possible that they can go straight to that treatment as well as starting epilepsy medicine. In terms of accessibility, I think some of the main difficulty at the moment is how long it can take to get a referral. Through NHS treatment, these are accessible once someone does get that diagnosis. Anybody with epilepsy should be entitled to free prescriptions in the UK, otherwise be incredibly expensive with the amount of epilepsy medicine. So I'd encourage anybody who is diagnosed to make sure, speak to their doctor about getting a medical exemption form so they can get their free prescription. The other treatments, in most cases, they're considered if somebody has tried 2 or more epilepsy medicine, that's still not effective in controlling their seizures. They can start to consider whether things like the VNS device, things like the ketogenic diet may be appropriate at that time. But again, not everybody would be suitable for those types of treatment as well. What the doctors are wanting to achieve is controlling seizures with as little side effects as possible on as little amount of medicine as possible. But all the epilepsy medicines, they have kind of a standard dose usually that is sort of the most common used, whether differs usually for children versus adults, it's going to be different doses. But what they generally try to do is they start low. So when they first introduce an epilepsy medicine, start at a very low dose and they build it up gradually until they get to the dose of what they call the maintenance dose. And that's the one that the person will then take for the foreseeable future. And hopefully that is what achieves effective seizure control. They can consider increasing the dose further in many cases. They won't start at the maximum dose, they'll reach the maintenance dose. Hopefully that works. If it doesn't, it could be an option that they increase further. It can be an option that they introduce a second medicine. It can be an option that they take one medicine away and introduce another one. All of these options that they can try. Again, one of the things that we hear about quite a lot on the helpline is getting the right treatment and care. As I say, it can be a trial and error, and works. But for others, especially with the pressures on getting appointments, all those sorts of things, it can take some time. So we absolutely encourage anyone to get in touch with us if they feel that they're not getting the right treatment, and we have some advice and information that hopefully can help with that.
Going back to brain surgery, how do they determine that someone needs brain surgery as a treatment for epilepsy?
Not everybody would be suitable for it. In most cases, you would need to have tried a couple of epilepsy medicines at least. But as I said, if they identify that someone is suitable and could really benefit from brain surgery, it could be tried earlier in some cases. In the cases where it's more likely to apply is in people that have what they call focal epilepsy. So epilepsy that happens or starts in one part of the brain, in one side. Then they can perform brain surgery on that part that's causing that problem, and then that hopefully leads to better seizure control. For people who have generalised epilepsy, so the entire brain is affected from the onset, that is much less likely to be an option.
So going forward in your organisation, what's the plans in the future for this organisation and yourself?
It's definitely exciting. As I say, there's lots of research happening. We have teams that are involved in essentially all aspects of epilepsy, really. We have all of our services, the support that we offer to people affected by epilepsy, and we will continue to offer them. It's quite exciting because we've rolled out some new services as well lately. Our helpline now has a live chat on our website. If you're on any page and reading some of our information, you've got a question about it, during the day, we've got a live chat, a helpline officer on standby on our live chat. We've just recently rolled out a befriending service as well for people affected by epilepsy. Feel they could benefit from around a 6-week programme of talking to one of our befriending volunteers, or just building up that confidence. We continue to offer our groups as well, both virtually and in person, and we've got support all across the UK. In terms of what else we're doing as well, we're involved in research. We have events happening, so fundraising events. We've got the Bradford 10K coming up. Really exciting stuff. One of our main goals is always raising awareness. The way that we would say is best to do that is to get involved. People affected by epilepsy can share their story with us, but anybody can become a volunteer. We also have support and resources for people affected by epilepsy, including our free e-learning courses, which include for epilepsy awareness and what to do when someone has a seizure. And we have an employer toolkit as well, which has been a popular resource, which is a toolkit designed to help employers support their staff who have epilepsy. We do unfortunately know that employment rates for people with epilepsy aren't the best, but we strongly believe that many people with epilepsy, with some awareness and understanding amongst others, can do most things that anybody can do. So we want to see that change. It has been going in the right direction, and we'll continue to work on that. We just encourage anyone that wants to know more or wants to raise awareness in their community to contact us. That can be on our helpline, 0808 800 50 50, and we'll happily talk to people about that. One of the questions we get a lot is that people are worried about someone who's having a seizure and they're breathing. Now, it's quite normal for breathing to sound really irregular during the seizure. So it's just important that it doesn't go on for longer than 5 minutes. But if the breathing doesn't return to normal after the seizure stops, then that, again, is time for an ambulance. So if the person's not breathing or their breathing is really irregular, really raspy, just not normal, then that would be, again, a reason for an ambulance.
And is it once they've had the collapse, or when they're thinking of the seizures coming and they've had it, should you ask the person after that, what do you feel or what did you do, or is that not to ask them?
The recovery times themselves can vary from person to person. Someone might just have a couple of minutes. Some people might need to rest and essentially sleep for longer. There's a lot of physical activity, particularly in tonic-clonic seizures, but in any seizure type, people might find that they're sleepy, tired, things like confusion, memory problems, problems speaking. All these things could be, in the majority of cases, temporary, but can range in the amount of time, and people can be affected in different ways. So it might be when the first person first comes around, they're not fully aware, or there is that bit of confusion, a bit of tiredness. So they might need a bit more time before they're able to sort of engage fully. So as someone comes around, just letting them know they've had a seizure, that you're there if they need anything. That's usually enough. In most cases, it's maybe quite normal for the person to have had this seizure, for someone who hasn't got full seizure control. And they may just want that time to come around, and when they come around, they're on with their day as usual. So it's important to not make too much sort of fuss around it sometimes, and just that simple knowing what to do and being calm and reassuring after, for most people, is usually enough.
And does that affect, like, if they're playing card games or, like, any stressful games? Or do they have to just play relaxing games and go to the gym, or like stay stress-free?
For most people with epilepsy, again, it's being able to do the same things that anyone else can do, whether that is tasks that can be quite mentally exhausting, whether that is tasks that can be quite physically exhausting. Many people with epilepsy run marathons, they work in high-stress jobs and do that successfully. People are affected in different ways, so some people may avoid those sorts of activities, but generally speaking, there's no problem with people with epilepsy doing those sorts of tasks. I think it's important that they have systems, if there's someone who doesn't have seizure control, for example, that there's systems in place for if they did have a seizure, so whether that's someone with them who knows what to do, the gym, for example, being fully informed of their medical condition so they know how to help if a seizure does happen. Workplaces, they can have a seizure action plan. We've got a template of that on our employer toolkit, a seizure action plan in place, so that if a seizure does happen, the right people know about it and know what to do in that situation. Or they've just got a care plan, and they may share that care plan with, whether it's a friend, family, a service provider, an employer, teacher, whatever it may be, sharing that plan that will say exactly what that person needs.
Like you said, recovery position for someone that's got a disability like a visual impairment, or someone who's listening at this now. Could you describe it to them? What do you mean by that?
We do have some information on our website, and I'd encourage people to look at that if they want to know sort of the specifics around things like the recovery position, but really just getting someone onto their side in a comfortable position is all that is really. If people aren't confident and they want to just stay with someone who's on their back, that's okay, but it is safer in the recovery position, just simply because it aids breathing. If for whatever reason the person is sick, because they're on their side, that's a much better position to be in. We've got an e-learning course completely free about what to do when someone has a seizure, and it goes through all of the visual aspects of putting someone in the recovery position. So I'd certainly encourage people to check that out if they want to know more. You can reach our helpline on 0808 800 50 50. That's 0808 800 50 50. It's a free phone number in the UK. Do give us a call if you have questions about epilepsy and the way it might be affecting you or someone in your life. You can reach us by email as well. So helpline, so that's HELPLINE @epilepsy.org.uk. If you go on our website, it's epilepsy.org.uk. Epilepsy Action on Google will bring us up as well. But epilepsy.org.uk. Lots of information and links through to our support there. If you're interested in becoming a volunteer, that's on there. If you're interested in fundraising, running an event, for example, that's all on there. There's a little pink bubble on every page while our live chat's open between 10 and 4, Monday to Friday. And that pink bubble with a little speech bubble in it, click on that and you go straight through to talking to someone on our helpline as well, if you prefer to chat that way. And as I say, that's a real person that you're talking to straight away, no robots, nothing like that. Talking to a real person. Got any questions, go on that as well. You can find us on all the social medias as well, usually at Epilepsy Action. Epilepsy.org.uk, that's EPILEPSY.org.uk.